Shalom, WJC families. It is time for our weekly Torah talk. All the holidays we've had, we actually haven't had a weekly Torah talk in a while, so it's great to be back together. This Shabbat is a special Shabbat. It is Shabbat Sukkot. And so we don't read our regular Torah reading. We read a special Torah reading for Sukkot. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about the Sukkot holiday itself. In particular, I want to highlight Sukkot and the issue of refugees, people fleeing from one place, trying to find a new place that will be safe and maybe even become a home. The relation to Sukkot should be obvious. We're told in Leviticus that we dwell in Sukkot, that God should remember that God caused us to dwell in Sukkot when we left Egypt. Right? So these huts, these makeshift huts, were the shelter that God provided for us. It doesn't sound so posh. It doesn't sound so protective. We'll come back to that in a minute. But first, I want to explain why this issue is so topical. Recently, asylum seekers and immigrants have been in the news. Particularly, a story caught my eye about a political, let's call it a stunt for lack of a better word, boondoggle, right? In order to make a point about the flaws in the immigration system of this country, a few groups of refugees, asylum seekers, immigrants were approached at the border and sent to various places, basically to make a splash. The politics of it are unimportant to me. Here's the message that I took from it. Not only that, yes, there are issues with our immigration system. I don't think any of us have any illusions about that improvements need to be made. There are debates. It's a political question of what those improvements should be. But here's what I took out of it, which I don't think was the point of those who were sending these migrants here, there, and everywhere. It became clear to me that it is just so easy to take advantage of these folks who are coming to our country, whether documented or undocumented, whether using the system that exists or trying to circumvent the system that exists. In the end, there are people, and these people are being taken advantage of. And we have no idea. I had no real idea how easy it was to take advantage of migrants today. I thought there were protections in place for this. But the fact that someone was able to approach these people, promise them work, and then send them, wherever, highlights the fact that protections are not helping. The idea that this could be done for political reasons only highlights to me how vulnerable these folks are to people who really want to take advantage of them. Send them to work camps. Send them to places where they'll be, given room and board, but the room and board costs more than the amount they're paid, and so they get stuck in sort of an indentured servitude, something out of, the 1930s, something out of the Grapes of Wrath. But it seems like it could be happening today. And unfortunately, at this point, with what I've experienced in the world, if people can be taken advantage of this way, it seems to me that there is someone who will take advantage of them this way. And that seems to have been proved in the last few weeks because of this political issue. So I don't want to talk about the politics of it, but I want to talk about the humanity of it. I want to talk about what it means to take a group of people and treat them like they're not people, like they don't matter, for whatever purposes. This is what God would not have happen to us, to the Israelites, to the Jews, when we left Egypt. We're told these huts that God had us dwell in, lots of midrash and lots of commentators, they say, no. The Sukkot are supposed to represent being a refugee, but what God provided for us was clouds of glory, right? God covered us with ananei hakavod so that we would have shade in the desert. We know God provided us with food, manna in the desert. God provided us with water through the mystical well that that followed Miriam in the desert, or with water by the waters of Marah, turning salty, brackish water sweet for the people. God provided us with, according to the Midrash, clothing by making sure that our clothes would not wear away in the desert. Right? It's embarrassing to be walking around in rags. God even provided us with protection through the mystical intervention in the battles against those who sought to take advantage of this fleeing people wandering through the desert. Protection, shelter, clothing, food and water, all those things God provides for the migrant, for the refugee, for us. And on this holiday, when we relive, going into booths and living in booths, the message is to remind us that there are still people in the world with this status and that they need our help. Our job, we're told in Deuteronomy, is lalechet bidrachav, to walk in God's ways, to do what God would do, to help in ways that God would help. And at least in part, that means protecting those who are the weakest. And that certainly means migrants and immigrants and refugees. And it's not just on Sukkot that reminds us of this. The most oft-repeated phrase in the Torah is, do not take advantage of the stranger because you were strangers in a strange land. In Exodus, we read that again and again. You shall not wrong the stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not oppress the stranger, one chapter later. For you know the soul of the stranger. Stranger here is ger, is migrant, is the stranger who lives among you. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. We see it again in Leviticus multiple times. We see it in Deuteronomy. You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the strange land. You shall not hate an Egyptian, for you were strangers in his land. Always remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I enjoin you to observe this commandment again and again and again. No phrase repeats itself as much in the Torah as the memory of being a ger, a stranger, a migrant, an immigrant, a refugee in the land of Egypt and after Egypt. So what does that mean for us? It means, first of all, that when people are, for whatever reason and under whatever circumstances, coming to this country, it is not right for us to treat them as anything less than the image of God that we see in them, that they are human beings. And to dehumanize them, to take advantage of them, well, that violates another core precept of the Torah, right? V'lifnei iver lo titein michshol. Right? You shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. Now, obviously, we wouldn't place a stumbling block before the blind. That wouldn't be nice. But the rabbis interpret this more broadly, that anyone who doesn't know their way, maybe doesn't know the culture, doesn't know the language, doesn't know the law, that we don't take advantage of them. We don't set them up to fail or to be taken advantage of. And so I think this Sukkot holiday is a reminder for us, not of our refugee status for our own sakes, for the historical sakes. Yes, it's important to remember our history, but only in as much as it defines our future. And so at WJC, we've got a committee, the Welcoming Circle, working hand in hand with a group of volunteers at Larchmont Temple. And we are working hard to help refugees who are coming here. And by the way, these refugees are Afghanis, people from Afghanistan who helped the U.S. Army when we were there and now have to flee under threat of life from the Taliban. They are Ukrainians, one particular mother and son who we've been helping out in cooperation with Larchmont Temple volunteers, people whose, the father and the husband is still fighting in Ukraine, part of the Ukrainian army, as is mandated, fighting off the Russian aggression. And these folks are here just fleeing for their lives. And so we have congregants who are helping them with their dental care, with their legal work, to get familiar with American culture by showing them around the city. Now trying to find someone who can help get the mother vocational training so that she can have a job and take care of herself, right? The highest form of tzedakah. I hope, at the very least, this Sukkot holiday will remind us that when we hear stories like the political story that we heard, none of us would have heard anything about that if it wasn't a political PR stunt. Which means that all of these issues, the ease with which refugees and asylum seekers can be taken advantage of, would just go under the radar as it has been for so long. So Sukkot should remind us to open our eyes, forget the politics. It's hard to take that political filter off and see the true story underneath, which is that humanity was under assault and probably is regularly, as demonstrated by that story. At the very least, to remember that and try and do our part to see the stories about people for what they are, even if there's politics involved. And all the more so, I hope you'll get involved in our welcoming circle. You can get in touch with me to let me know you'd like to be involved, or with Debbie Katz, who's representing us to the welcoming circle. Great work is being done to help the least among us, the weakest among us. Right? And that's what this holiday is all about. When we sit in that sukkah and we enjoy the big meals and the guests and the fresh autumn air, we should remember that what we're remembering is not how great it is to be in a sukkah, but how vulnerable it is to be in a sukkah. We were lucky enough to have the protection of God during this, the memory of what we remember on the Sukkot holiday. Can we help Lalachet Bidrachav, walk in God's ways, so that those who are coming to this country for fear of their lives, coming to our neighborhoods, to our area for fear of their lives, can be supported and protected? Ultimately, that is what Sukkot is remembering. It's not about remembering the past. It's about remembering that we have a responsibility to share that divine holiness, to share that divine gift, to represent that holiness in the world. May we all succeed in doing so. Wish you a Chag Sameach, a happy Sukkot holiday.